Hi, my name is James Delano, and I'll be moderating a discussion tonight on photography as photo activism for photo evidence. And I'll be talking to three photographers tonight, each of which were either Photo Book Award winners for photo evidence or finalists. We'll talk to Solmaz Diani from Iran, who's based in the UK, about her wonderful work at Lake Urmia. Josue Rivas, who is an indigenous person from Mexico, indígena, who did a wonderful project on Standing Rock, and the book is called Standing Strong, to fight the pipeline coming down through indigenous peoples' lands in the United States. And I'll talk to Fausto Poravini about his documenting a dam project in Ethiopia in the Omo Valley, and how that has profoundly changed the indigenous people living there, their lives forever, the ramifications. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about photography as activism. And I mean, to be honest with you, I could categorize my work this way as well. My work for photo evidence, Black Tsunami, Japan 2011 book that came out in 2012 could kind of be categorized this way. But it's a term I kind of avoid in a way, if you will, because it seems to suggest maybe a partisan diversion from facts to opinion. And I just feel that the work we do adheres to facts strictly, and that there are some forms, some issues that have only one side, only one viable side, in cases of things like genocide or the massacre in cold blood in the streets by a despot like President Duterte in the Philippines, and his war on drugs, which I documented in 2018, 2017, 2018. Sometimes there's only kind of one side to the story, but what's common is the desire to affect positive change in our work while adhering to the facts. One photographer, and I'm going to read this and clean it up a little bit because of the salty language, says, he basically puts it as, you just have to give enough of a damn, substituting a word, to try and do something. I just give a damn about the folks around me. So for me, in a sense, he said, it is a sense of duty. And I would say that I can deeply identify with that statement. For a century, starting with Lewis Hine and documenting child labor in the United States to the present day, this sort of work has evolved, and you will see tonight from the photographer's gifted work tonight that the approach can be as diverse as the people who are making it. And I think that'll be readily evident here. So again, we'll have Solmaz Diani from Iran, Josue Rivas, originally from Mexico, living in the United States, and Fausto Poravini from Italy. And first, I will take some time and introduce a little bit of my work to give a background of my involvement in photography as activism, for lack of a better term, and then I'll have each of them share their work and also with their own words. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the presentation and the discussions tonight. So I wanted to share some work with you that speaks to the concept of activism in photography, for lack of a better term, sharing with you projects that I've done. The first of which I completed with FotoEvidence in 2012, and it was the book Black Tsunami, Japan 2011, and it spoke to the aftermath of the greatest earthquake, one of the greatest earthquakes on record. It was a triple disaster, the tsunami, which was up to 30 meters or 100 feet
in depth in places where I visited, and the nuclear disaster. Quite personal to me. I've lived in Japan for 27 years, and I had already been living here for quite a long time. And what it pointed out to me was that we are all just one very bad day away from experiencing what you're seeing on the screen. We have a habit in what happens in photojournalism is that we happen to visit often people on the worst days of their lives, and it's hard to put the viewer in their shoes or as close as you can to help the viewer understand that a day before, a week before, these were ordinary people living ordinary, peaceful lives, and that they're individual human beings. They could have been my neighbors, my family, and that was part of the goal in the way I photographed this. This is Rikuzen Takata, which was literally washed off the map. It is probably the one project I could say most that collectively, not myself alone, but collectively all of the photographers who documented this, made the world aware of just how intense this crisis was. This is the first night I was up there in the immediate aftermath. It's 8 degrees. That would be high 40s inside. This man is helping to brush his daughter's teeth. Privacy is a huge thing in Japan, and this was quite painful for everybody to be living with absolutely no privacy at all. I felt like because we were allowed in to document this, that the world could comprehend the scale of the disaster, and I do believe that it brought in millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of aid and volunteers in from all over the world to help with the recovery. There's also the symbolic side. This is a cherry tree in bloom about a month after I had visited first Ofunato up in Iwate Prefecture the first time. We have plum trees which bloom in winter similarly, but not as gloriously. And they last for about a month, whereas the cherry trees last for 1 week, and they have become a symbol to Japanese in traditional culture that of the transience of youth. They are glorious for a week and then they're gone. And I made a mental note to go back up when I saw these trees to see if they actually bloomed as a sign of spiritual sign of renewal in Tohoku. And I was just up there last week in Fukushima, where the nuclear disaster is, and being, if you say activism, it also means staying and sticking with the story, because at least for the people of Fukushima, the disaster is not over a decade later. This March 11th will be the 10th anniversary of the Great Tsunami. So again, the collective work of photographers, I believe, made a difference, and that to me is to what it's all about, to affect positive change through our bearing witness. This is work from 2017, 2018, documenting Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines, massacre on the poorest of the poor in his war on drugs. To this day, I haven't heard of any kingpins being taken down, arrested. It's always been the people on the street, the users on the street, the dealers on the street, or people who just have enemies who want to get rid of them and have connections with the police or the assassins. This is the family of Junmar Abletes. Junmar, the family said, flee to the outer island of Samar. And he did, and he was safe. And he missed his family. So he came back against their wishes to collect them for a visit to Samar from Manila. It's a different island than Luzon, where Manila is. When he came back, he was assassinated. And this is the funeral and the raw emotion. This is in the morgue. Julius Soriano, who was the breadwinner for this family. Jenilyn, his sister, is just weeping inconsolably because he woke up that morning any other day. And who would have thought that by nightfall this would have been the case? And I did go back a year later and meet Jenilyn, and she's doing okay, which was heartening. It took a while. She lives in the slums as well, and they have help finding the people, the targets that they attack, because it took us 2 hours and we knew where she lived. And these assassins find these people, go in, go out. They have help. They have local help to find these people. And this is Manuel Barbe, and he, as you can see, it's like an L-shaped corner, and two men on a motorcycle, one with a gun on the back, shot him while another waited on the other side of the L as a lookout. And a friend was taken to the hospital, but the way he bled out, it's unlikely he survived. Getting back to Julius Soriano, talk about human rights violations. The police said that he had resisted arrest. And you can see the bullet still lodged in his wrist. And you can see this indentation here from the plastic zip ties. The bullet stopped right at the crease of the zip ties. He was bound when he was shot. And like all three men I saw that night who were killed, he had bullet holes in his forearms. They tried to deflect the bullets with their forearms to no avail. So again, just like the Black Tsunami work, I feel like collectively, and there are a lot of Filipino photographers who spent a lot more time there than I have, that we made a difference, at least in slowing the pace of assassinations. It's still going on today. I've been in touch with people on the ground, believe it or not. So it's slowed down. It hasn't ended. Just want to quickly talk, because I don't want to take up too much time. This is from the rainforest. I've been documenting down there for over 2 decades. And the destruction is hard to quantify, but it's always for me, it's always about trying to find a new way to communicate. This is an Iban woman from Borneo. And I made a multiple image. I don't want to inject too much into it, let the viewer create the narrative, but she's laid over a sawmill depot where there's wood is of so little value. They piled it up and made piers out of it. These were rainforest trees that they've decimated and brought down river and are of so little value. They make a pier out of it, and it's destroying the lives of indigenous people there. It's making their traditional life impossible and changing them from the Einsteins of the surviving in the forest to unskilled labor. This is on the peninsula of Malaysia in Kelantan, the Batak people. And again, I've been documenting them for 2.5 decades. I was there recently. They had an epidemic quite similar to the pandemic. It was a viral outbreak, claimed 10% of their village settlement. The people there claimed 10% of their lives. This is 2 images from the same place. The forest, the ghost forest, and that's what I call it, is the forest that was in this place. And the Sultan of Kelantan, without consulting with the Batak, allowed their forest to be clear cut and converted to oil palm plantation. And the climate change is local, and the climate change is global. This contributes to both, and it's also a land grab. You want to talk about land rights? They don't hold title to the land, even though they've lived there literally for tens of thousands of years. And finally, this is Som. She's Batak. She's lovely. Just wanted to show how the Batek and the rainforest really exist as one. She lost 2 daughters and I believe a grandchild to that mysterious viral outbreak in 2019, happened just before the COVID. So again, trying to find new and better ways to communicate complex messages in photographs. Finally, just quickly, I have a feed called Everyday Climate Change, about 50 photographers doing week-long feed takeovers, always talking about climate change and the ramifications, the manifestations, how it's happening, not over there, it's happening right here and right now. So this is a more concrete example, and I'm thinking of doing some interviews, perhaps a YouTube channel of activists and photographers and artists who are dealing with climate change visually. And finally, last but not least, this is a book I published with Madosha, which is a Japanese publisher, called The Mercy Project. And in Japanese, we called it Inochi. That's the kanji for it, which means life. And it's 118 photographers that I brought together and asked them to teach me what mercy means to them, because my sister had passed quite quickly, but received incredibly merciful care from hospice in the United States. So we donated the profits from this book to split it between hospice in the United States and in Japan. So just talking about activism, how we try to affect positive change through our work. And I'm excited to get on and talk about our guests here today, Josue Dariani, Solmaz Dariani, and Fausto Podavini. And they will share their projects with us and teach us about their own vision. Thank you very much. And I'll talk to you on the other side. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk to Solmaz Dariani, the winner of the 2021 FotoEvidence W Award for her project on Lake Urmia in Iran called The Eyes of the Earth. The FotoEvidence W Award is to engage women photographers who want to tell very personal stories, and this is a very almost memoir-like collection of images that documents the changes when the lake literally began to dry up and its effect on the community and her family. Solmaz is based in the UK. She's an Iranian self-taught documentary photographer. She received funding for this from the Ideas Tap Magnum Photos grants to help the project come to fruition. And it is a deeply personal and beautiful document of this lake, and I want to welcome her to share that work with us and describe what she was thinking while she was making these photographs.
Okay, I'm just going to share my presentation about my long-term work, and just a moment, please. Yeah. Okay. Actually, Lake Urmia is one of this project is my long-term project, and it's an investigation into the environmental and human impact of desiccation of Lake Urmia. I started this project in 2014, and I continued it till now, and I think I will continue it in future too. It is about the relationship between environment and humans, and also it is my own personal story because my family lived in a small port called Sharafkhana Port around the lake, and I also showed with this project showed how this desiccation and dry out in long term in 2 decades and actually more than 2 decades just impacted my own family's life. So sorry. Okay. As you can see in the map, Lake Urmia is located in northwest of Iran, near to Turkey border, and nearly 6 million people who live around the lake have deep economical and also social bonds with the lake. And these people live in major cities of Urmia and Tabriz. Actually, more than 6 million people live around the lake, if we consider just the smaller towns and villages. And it is shared between two main provinces, East Azerbaijan and West Azerbaijan, that mostly Azerbaijani Turkic people live around this lake. And they call this lake as Turkeys of Iran or Turkeys of Azerbaijan. In next slides, I'm going to show first how with combining my own archive photos and also the some photos from my family's photo album, how it was, how the lake was like 20 or 30 years ago, and how this dry out affected it and how it is now. Yeah, this is the port town. In this picture, you can see the port town of where my grandparents live, and this structure is a ship ship repairing structure. And the first above picture is taken by my father in 1992, and the other one is 2008, and which I took. And you can see that how seriously lake started shrinking. The height of water in 1992 was around 8 meters, and now you can see that there is nothing, and it just disappeared. Yeah, some comparative pictures from. This is the same port, which you can see it was full of water. My uncles used to were sailors actually, and my grandfather used to have guest house, my grandparents, which they managed together. The lake has lost around 88% of its surface area during 3 decades, and scientists blame like overuse of the water supply and irrigation, and overuse of the agriculture, and also a lot of dams and mismanagement of the government, a lot of dams that they made around the basin, and also climate change and drought that happened during these 3 decades. Yes, this is a very interesting, and this pumping machine. They just put the mayor of the town or port town just put it here in middle of the lake to pump water from those places that has water, and to pump it to the to the coast. So people when come to the coast, they can come and swim. But during 3 years, even this small pond also dried out. Okay, this picture is a picture from my childhood beside the lake in the port town, where I almost spent all of my summers and also my school weekends in my grandparents' house. This story is very also personal, and beside being an environmental study, it is also very personal story for me. It's about my memories on the lake, and my childhood, and also the life of my grandparents. My grandfather lost his, as I told you, my grandparents owned a guest house beside the lake. It was a waterfront guest house, but it is just lies in the ruins now. And also my uncles who were sailors, they just migrated to other cities, other bigger cities, because they also lost their jobs and there were no tourists around. You saw that the port town looks like unpopulated and like a ghost house. And the lake that was once the West Asia's biggest lake, now it's like a salt desert actually. Yes, here is my grandfather and my grandfather's guest house, which is kind of ruined. And these swan boats they were made and designed by my uncle. He just made it, and now they are just useless in the guest house. My grandmother really inspired me, and the reason was for starting this project. My grandmother was an inspiration for me because she has a really special bond with her environment. She just planting more than 800 trees during her lifetime, and she was so caring about trees, her environment and flowers without really knowing about the climate change and these things. She was just caring about her environment, and she was all the time I was seeing in her gardens planting something, or but actually she lost also some of her gardens, grape gardens and almond gardens, because of the salinity of the soil after lake shrinking, and because of the salt storms. They drought out because they were sensitive to salt. But she had other gardens, and she tried to keep them alive. So my grandmother really inspired me to while working on this project. As you can see in these pictures, even when she has a plant, a small like a tree in her house, she's keeping it from cold by covering it with a plastic wrap, and also it is covering with piece of cloth, so make the plant to feel warm. And I really learned from my grandmother when I was starting this project, and also my childhood memories, which passing my grandparents' house also inspired me. Actually, the vanishing of the Lake Urmia and the vast consequences of the environment, this environmental catastrophe, just started a trigger in and people had some protests in 2011 and 2012. And in 2013, this protest and the anger of the people around the lake, which they were seeing their ecosystem in danger because of the salt storms and also because a lot of lung disease. So the government started to, President Rouhani's government started to fund $5 billion to revive the lake in 10 years. And also the torrential rains in 2016 and 2019 caused some revival to the lake. So it just really turned back from a complete death and completely turning to a salt desert. In this picture, you can see that people, after like 2016's torrential rains, people came to visit the lake around Urmia city. This ship was completely surrounded with salt for kilometers. But after this torrential rains in 2016, it's in water. Yes, again, it's 2016, 2017. And the red color of the lake is in summers, because the salinity of the salt lake after water evaporation is high. So some microorganisms just are active in the lake. So they cause this blood red color of the salt lake. My family always, like, my grandmother died because of the COVID-19 2 months ago, and my grandfather died 2 years ago. Here, my uncle shows some guests from his building, the lake. My family always had the hope that one day lake will turn back to its good days. And here, after torrential rains of the 2016, my uncle shows his guests around that where the water line is, because in years before 2016, it was completely dry. The horizon was like a salt desert, but after 2016, it's just a lot. You can see a little bit of water line in the horizon. And yeah, as I told you, my family always had the hope that lake will return back. Yeah, and this is my last slide, and I wanted to say that the vanishing of the lake Urmia is not just an just an environmental disaster for the people around the lake. It is also an emotional wound. And the only thing that we can hope is that the lake to come back. And the name of the Eyes of Earth for me comes from this quote from Henry David Thoreau, which a lake is a landscape's most beautiful and expressive feature. It's the Earth's eye, looking into which the beholders measure the depths of its own nature. And this quote was really meaningful for me because it's about identity, and it's about like my own story. When looking to this lake, I found myself, my own identity. I'm sure that it is the same for all the people living around the lake and living those memories. And also, I named the Eyes of Earth because Lake Urmia is also called the Eyes of Cats, because Iran's map looks like a sitting cat, and the Lake Urmia is exactly spotted on the this cat's eye. So also, it is also a connection between this the eye of cat and the eye of Earth. Yes, and that's it. And I just won the FotoEvidence photo book grant, and this project will become a book, and it will be out hopefully in May or end of March.
Fantastic. Okay. I have so many questions. It brought your work brings up a lot of emotions, and it's got this kind of quiet beauty to it. We're talking about photo activism, and again, I've mentioned before, it's a term that I'm not always comfortable with because I just try to work on something I'm passionate about, and your passion comes through this. But what I find interesting is we had different ways in which the three of you, Fausto, Josue, and you, connect with subjects. Fausto went to Ethiopia, a former Italian colony, and he felt a connection through hard lessons of history and colonialism and being from the former colonial master. Josue is indigenous man who was born in Mexico, and comparing the indigenous experience in the United States versus Mexico, coming to it with that whole personal vision and understanding, and still learning a lot. This is for you incredibly personal. It's to me that you are this is about your family. How do you feel that made this project different for you than choosing a subject in the UK or anywhere else in the world?
Yes, actually, my whole photography, if I can call it career, or and this way of starting taking picture for me started with the lake. Like, it wasn't like that I wanted to become a photographer, because in Iran it is very hard, very, very hard to make a living from photography, and also it is not even considered a job. So in university I studied computer science because, as my parents asked, and I wanted to find a decent job with that background that I have, which I did actually. But it was really, really accidental. Like, I didn't want to, I wasn't like that, going to courses and starting just telling a story. When I started picturing the lake, I didn't even know how a photo essay or photo story is going to be told. I had no idea. And in that time, both financially and both because of this traveling restriction, Muslim ban, or many other things, I didn't have this opportunity to go abroad or to go like for festivals and workshops to learn about it. So it was all about my instincts. So I take my father, just I had a small, a compact Panasonic camera, which my father just gave me as a present. So I started taking pictures with that, just reading some books and looking through other photographers which inspired me. So this work for me started with seeing something, that
Hmm.
something happening there, and the uh, the story needs to be told. So just imagine, for more than just 30 years, I was living in this region, okay? And I was seeing how lake changed, like it didn't change even. I was seeing, because the part that my grandparents were living always was full of water and full of tourists, and it was a very beautiful place. And it's suddenly in 10 years, especially in 10 years between like 2000 and 2040, it is turned like a ghost house. Like, when you're just going to the city, you were seeing that there is no water, no lake, no sound, just old people, everybody, all young, just traveled to other cities, because my city was 1 hour from that port town. So I just felt that I should tell the story. And in that time, this story was already out. I mean, some other professional photographers who were like working for more than 10 years, they already work on the lake. Like many Iranian photographers, I can almost say all Iranian photographers have a story from Lake Urmia. But my story was different because it was about my own family, my own memories, feelings. And I think that that's the way it make it a bit different from just telling an environmental story, because there is expression in Persian that we say that whatever comes from heart, it will necessarily sit in the heart. So I believe that because this story really comes from my heart, it can make a connection with the people when just reading or watching the photos. That's,
Can you? I'm
yeah.
sorry. Can you describe at? Was there a point at which you something switched in your mind photographing there from just you thought I'm going to make photos that are meaningful to me about where my grandparents live to this could become a project. Was there a time when that
Yes.
happened?
Yes, exactly. That happened. Actually, um, the time that happened was that, okay, Magnum Foundation, Magnum had a grant, and I already had my project in, the grant was in 2014, 15. And from 2014 till 2015, I had some pictures and I made some small story, which I edited with my mother.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah,
Wow.
yes, exactly. My mother that has no idea about photography, nothing. I just printed like 100 photos, and I told mom, let's just edit it. I don't know what I'm doing, but let's do it with how you feel about the lake, because you lived there like your whole life. You were born there. And I edited the photo with my mother, 10 pictures, and I sent it for this Magnum Grant contest, and I won it. So from this point, I this switch happened. I started looking to this project more seriously. And after that, I started traveling all around the lake, looking for the same stories like my grandparents and my own family, and interviewing them, asking how this shrinking lake affected them. And I found really, really interesting stories about people which had the same experience.
Now, this is an interesting point. I mean, oftentimes I caution people that if they get into a too much education, suddenly people are starting to say to you, not great education. This may not be the case, but sometimes what happens is somebody says, you can't do that. You don't do that. That's not the way you work in journalism. And I feel like oftentimes someone who has come to it from a different place like you have, you're bringing a whole different perspective to it. You're still faithful to the facts, but it's much more personal. You're not worrying about, am I doing this right? Am I photographing properly? Is this journalism? Is this art? I mean, do you feel like because you didn't go through some structured journalism school, it helped you to photograph this story more personally?
Um, Actually, I think it could be both right and not right and wrong, but it is something in middle. I always really, really feel this gap of getting some academic education, which I did it last year in the MJX, which because I won a scholarship to study in Danish journalism and media school. Um, and it was really good, and I think that it is very important also to take this education, because I also always feel this void that I need to more about it. Um, but the way that I started photography at first without any academic background was because I don't know, because I learned from some more experienced photographers in my region, because my region has really good photographers, social documentary. So I wasn't thinking in an art way. I was just thinking like direct, like a social documentary way, like changing nothing, just getting the moment. And, even if you look my first portrait, I don't have like those portraits that people can sit there and I just take a portrait, because I was feeling that it's not right with, is it right to uh, just with social documentary way that tell people, okay, sit there and I will take your portrait, which is, I think it's absolutely. But in that time I didn't have that concept, so I was looking for just the moments, seeking for moments to take when it was created in that moment, I should be there and take the picture.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why I just traveled a lot and put a lot of time, like every
Yeah.
week. I had another full-time job, but every week I was traveling like 100 kilometers around the lake
Wow.
to just go to the
It definitely
center.
shows. Yeah. The
Yes.
commitment. Running kind of a little bit out of time here. So I want to ask you kind of a last question regarding how has the work been received in Iran by the local community, et cetera? How has that reception been? Because as you said, it's been photographed by several people, but I've never seen it approached in this sort of way. It's a completely beautiful kind of tribute to the nature there.
Yes, actually, the local community, like even my own family, they weren't believing in me at all. Like even, yeah, right now they do, but in that time they were just like even people, like it was a small village, a small town, and when I was going around, my icon was telling me, "Oh, it's dangerous to travel around the lake. What are you doing? What this work have?" You know, uh, they didn't have any idea about the work. And it was just kind of, they were thinking that it's kind of a hobby for me. But it was really important for me. This switch or trigger happened when Leonardo DiCaprio shared a picture of me about the Lake Urmia and addressed this issue. And it was a
Oh,
huge explosion, not also in my local community, but the whole Iran. Like
Wow.
many newspapers come to me and they just had interviews, and I told the story and how I approached the story, which it was personal, and it was really really huge impact on people, I think, not locally but also in the whole country.
Well, thank you for joining us. This talk is going to be with Josue Rivas. He's the winner of the 2018 Photo Evidence Book Award with World Press Photo for his series Standing Strong on the protests against the pipeline in the Dakotas. It's about the indigenous resistance to violations of their land in Standing Rock, North Dakota, and resisting the Dakota Access Pipeline. Josue is an indigenous futurist, Mexica and Otomi indigenous person was born in Mexico. He's a creative director, visual storyteller, and educator working at the intersection of art, technology, journalism, and decolonization, according to his homepage. He's also a 2020 Catchlight Fellowship Leadership Fellow and a Magnum Foundation Photography and Social Justice Fellow. So I'd like to welcome Josue, and he's going to share with us this incredible, hard-earned project that resulted in the book Standing Strong.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josue Rivas. I am Mexica. I am Otomi, and I am also a person that really cares a lot about our state of our planet, and also the state of our communities and indigenous communities across the world. This project is like not even a project. I think this series, this story of standing strong, it's rooted in not only the past for our ancestors, but I think a lot is for the future. As I keep looking back at these images, 4.5 years now from when I made them, it's very much about thinking in the future. I live at Standing Rock for about 7 months back in 2016 to document the Dakota Access Pipeline opposition from indigenous peoples and allies that came together at the Alshati camp in near the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. The story, I think, as I continue to process it up until today, has evolved to not only as an awakening for humanity, but I think as a turning point for how we are seeing the state of the world today. This protest, what some call protest, was also a prayer and was also a ceremony. So with that, I want to share this quote from an activist, a writer, a poet that passed away a few years ago and deeply influenced the work that I did at Standing Rock. Every human being is a raindrop, and when enough of the raindrops become clear and coherent, then they become the power of the storm. John Trudell. For me, when I think about Standing Rock and how people came from all different directions to stand together for one common goal, which was to protect the water from the Missouri River. For me, when I think about that, I think about the resilience of our communities throughout the world that are still protecting a lot of the places that we call home. I think that when I was at Standing Rock, it was the first time in my life that I ever felt at home, that I ever felt accepted for who I was, and in that way, I think that influenced how I documented this story and how I showed up. There was a big influence of protocol of different ceremonies that I had been part of with Lakota peoples and also with other communities that allow me to understand that when one shows up to a place that you're a guest at, you have to come with something in your hands. You have to come with an offering or something to offer instead of thinking about taking from that place or from those peoples. So when I show up to Standing Rock, I understood that, and that gave me it was a guide for me to document. It was um, a reminder constantly to think about farther than just that moment and that place in time. I think that a lot of these protocols, a lot of these rituals allow me to photograph from within and to photograph and document in a way that was regenerating the community instead of extracting from that community. A lot of the images that I made were silent, were very quiet, and a lot of them were not. And I think that that balance, it's key into how this work has reached a lot of people and has in a way also told the story that we've seen many people document. But I think that specifically for my purpose of why I documented this, it was also to incorporate and almost integrate this narrative, this movement really of indigenous narratives being told by indigenous peoples. I think that for far too long we've normalized um, non-indigenous peoples telling the stories that are most important to us for us. And I think that we're in a moment where bringing balance to that, it's key, because as we continue to understand what happened at Standing Rock and what's happening in different communities across North America and the world, we also understand that ultimately we are all relatives, and that what happens to those people at Standing Rock, it's also what's happening to all of us. Um, and I think that that is my goal too with a lot of this work, is to not only remind people that we need to bring balance to this way that we tell these stories about indigenous peoples, and the Standing Rock, and especially the images that came out of Standing Rock were a great example of that. It's who's telling their narrative and who's going to get uplifted for telling that narrative, and which images are we going to digest as a society, not only as people in the industry, but also as people that are part of communities and that are um, we're all in a way responsible to overturn and really reimagine a new paradigm for photography and the way that we consume images. So a lot of these images are intended like that hopefully in 100 years or hopefully less than 100 years, we won't be talking about who's supposed to be telling the story, but we'll have a normalized understanding that um, that the stories of indigenous peoples, especially that of Standing Rock and that of the Lakota people, are sacred. And that when we make something that is sacred, then we're able to not only do it for us in this moment, but also for 7 generations ahead of us. So with that in mind, with that a lot of that intent, I documented a lot of the times in a way that was more in connection with how I was feeling instead of what I was seeing. A lot of the times I will get out there and document, and I just knew that I was about to experience something that could potentially change my life, and that could potentially echo back to my ancestors and also echo to my descendants, to the people that will come after me. So I personally would again follow the protocols of the different peoples that were around me, my community, those peers that were also documenting, those indigenous photographers, storytellers that were there, and often start the day off or start that before I documented with a prayer or with some form of ritual that will cleanse not only myself as a person and my own spirit, but also my camera, for example. Setting an intention of why am I doing this today? Why am I going out there to document another action to stop the pipeline? Am I perpetuating stereotypes? Am I perpetuating violence that could come back after this? How am I telling this story? And I will center myself on that. And a lot of the people around me, I will see them doing that too, where like I said earlier, it was a movement. It was and it is a movement that will start seeing soon how when we tell these stories from our own perspective, then we start seeing life a little differently, and it starts changing our narrative, even within our own selves and our own stereotypes that we have about indigenous peoples. So, like I said earlier, Standing Rock was definitely quiet for me in a lot of ways, and how I approached it was quiet. But there were times where I also felt the darkness and the obscurity of what society also can be. A lot of times that will manifest through police violence, or seeing how even the internal dynamics of the camp were working. You know, how you had intergenerational uh, conflict. You know, sometimes where the folks that were older, they didn't want to do things a certain way, and the younger folks wanted to do things a certain way, and all these different complexities of living in a camp that at some point had 10,000 people in it. I think that for me, acknowledging and even including some of these harder images, some of these more conflict images into the book, into the story, was so important, because it allowed me to express that frustration and that also pain of being an indigenous man in 2016, and documenting um, and seeing history repeat itself through my images of documenting violence against indigenous peoples. It was it was hard not to put down the camera and show and just try to interfere, or try to, I wouldn't even call it interfering. I think that for me it was really seeing that these people that were being either attacked or being pushed down, where that was me. That was also, I mean, some of these folks I met at camp, they became really good friends of mine, and started really understanding that this narrative, that this story was much bigger than just me being an objective photojournalist. I think that um, I think that language in itself, in photography and in our industry, has not evolved and has stayed dormant for a long time, where we think that photography, it's this really broad, even for journalists, it's a really broad um, area where we have to fit into. And I think that we're in a moment where we're starting to realize that what happens to a few people happens to all of us, and that sometimes you have to do something about it. And if your images are a vehicle for that, then I think that that's the future. And I think that that's what we're going to start seeing very soon in the industry, that the way that we've been thinking about this medium, it's completely outdated, and we have to upgrade our operating system on it. um Standing Rock was also this deep reflection within my own um, understanding of what I want the future, for example, of my son to be like as a young indigenous boy. I think that there was um, a lot of reflection, but also a lot of ambition and through that, experiencing these moments of 7 months of documenting. I knew that these images were gonna be lasting for a long time, and by that I mean that in the future, in 100 years and 200 years from now, when we look back at 2016 and what happened at Standing Rock, I want people to feel what it was like to be there, but also to harvest the fruits of what was done there through these images as well. I think that a lot of the times in my work, I try to incorporate different messages that are almost hidden within the image, and if somebody sits down and really looks at it and really tries to translate it, then they can, that is the journey, I think. And for me, also understanding that these images are, they have these complexities to it, these messages to it, but also that it all leads to the same place, which is that we are all related and that we are all relatives. And with that, yeah, I would like to just say thank you, Tlasokamati, to all of you for listening. And yeah, just don't forget that we're all related. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, let me just put us pin both. So, Josue, this is such a. I've got so many things to say, and I'm going to try to make sense. Being a North American, one of the things I really appreciated about living in Asia, as far as indigenous people, I grew up out in outside of New York City, and we would say that we would have indigenous names of mountains, parks, rivers. This is where the Lenni Lenape used to live, and they weren't. There are some pockets of people, very small, but the genocide is this massive blind spot. And then the continued disappearing and despacito way of indigenous rights in North America continues. In Asia, it's not great for indigenous people, but people still occupy their own land. So where there are people, there's still more hope. And likewise with the Lakota. In fact, I've seen teepees in northern Mongolia and in Siberia, not like teepees, showing this connection. You mentioned that we're all related, we're all migrants in some way or another. So my question to you, regarding you were born and are familiar with Mexican culture and the way the history is and mainstream regards indigenous rights there, and you are familiar and live in the United States, and you are intimately familiar with the sad situation there. How did that inform the way you work? Because I'm sure this gave you much more. How would I say? It's much more personal. It's you. It's your life.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that there was a moment of humbling myself too, to understand when I was there documenting this story, that that it felt personal, but at the same time there was a level of a learning curve, to understand, um, how do people in the Lakota community do this, and just showing up to support that narrative. So it's almost like showing up to to the photo session, not thinking of a certain aesthetic or a certain lighting you're gonna have, but rather showing up and just giving it all away, really, and showing up and with your hands full, instead of how I want it to look like. And I think that came from my father, actually, because growing up, my father's a photographer. Both my mom and my dad are photographers, and I grew up going to like quinceañeras and like weddings and like baptisms in Mexico, documenting every weekend with my dad. And I also saw how oftentimes my father he would go to places where people, he will photograph them, and they wouldn't have money to pay for the photos. So he will often give them away. And my mom will get so mad at him, because he's like, why are you giving this away? Oftentimes when we will come back to those places, everybody will feed us, everybody will take care of us, and it was this reciprocal understanding that that what we call, at least in my perspective, like my medicine, my gift, whatever I'm here to do on earth, it's that you give it away in order to keep it, and I think that seeing that as a little kid, and really seeing how that affected our livelihood, as people working, with my parents, gave me also that foundation, I think, because when I would show up to ceremonies that were now, my own Mexica ceremonies, um, it was similar, but it wasn't the same. There was different protocols. There's different ways of doing things. There's different songs. It's a completely different world. So I think that's really important, because when I showed up to Standing Rock, it wasn't like, oh, I know what I'm doing here. It was like a constant reminder that, if you show up with your hands full, you'll be good, but also listen. Also, if you make a mistake, say, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. I didn't know that. And that's as simple as, like, for example, a lot of photographers that went to Standing Rock, they would tell them, hey, make sure you don't photograph during this prayer, because in our culture, like, when someone's praying, you just don't photograph. You take off your hat and whatever. And a lot of people didn't like that. they were like, well, I'm a journalist, I'm here to tell this story, and the New York Times sent me, so they want photos by 3 p.m. It was really weird,
Mm.
like westernized kind of vibes. And I would see that, and you know, I was like, wow, like it's a different world. Like I would never show up to someone's house. Like for example, when people think of Standing Rock, they think like protests, cops, protesters, and in really what it was a camp. And Lakota folks, Lakota and Nakota folks, they will camp like that, you know. And a lot of different tribes around North America, they will have camps where it was like, you show up here, you have to behave a certain way, you know, you have
Yeah.
to show a certain level of respect. And I think that looking back in retrospect, you know, when I see images from Standing Rock, like something will pop off, like, oh, you know, Standing Rock this, or like Standing Rock that, and then you see the images that are used, that are chosen, you know, by a lot of media outlets. It's just these specific narratives that continue to like create stereotypes about what that was and what indigenous peoples are. Because as you said, indigenous peoples are very diverse.
Mm.
Most people don't know that there's indigenous peoples in Europe, you know, the Sami people.
Mm.
They think indigenous peoples, they think like, oh, Edward S. Curtis's photos of like Native Americans and like headdresses and teepees, you know. And it's like I think that's the larger conversation, is like, how do we break the stereotypes as a collective, as humanity, you know.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a lot about listening, and I think that that's so important. Is that you went up there with some things in common, but realizing I have a lot to learn about the culture up here, and I've got to sit back. And that's what I loved about your work, is that it is about a people. It isn't. It's about something that happened that was very important, but you peeled away and you cared enough to say, who are the people? What are how are people feeling? How are people living? And I think that that infuses the work with extra power. You know, I'd like to ask you. Recently, I had, just out of the blue, a young a student come to me with a film on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the Gwich'in people's lands, and there's a young indigenous woman named Chana who is involved in that. She's probably about 18 to 24, so I don't know exactly how old she is. But you mentioned, you know, who controls the narrative. Have you any idea how we can, why not, and how more indigenous U.S. citizens, you know, occupying North America, why aren't we seeing their stories? Why do you think that is, or so seldom do we see their stories? Why do you think that is?
Mhm. I mean, gets really complicated, but in my opinion, I think that when you erase peoples, and you know, also acknowledging that is the foundation of the United States, that the foundation of the country is the, you know, the enslavement and the genocide of others, and not, you know, it was intended. It wasn't just kind of like, oh, like, let's just live together. You know, it's like, hey, we
That
want to
was,
erase you.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
know, for example, anything from, you know, when you look at the native, like Indian boarding schools in North America and United States and Canada, and even in Mexico and other parts of Central America, used to have boarding schools where native
Mm.
children will be taken away from their families, and they will be put into this, you know, into these programs that were like supposed to make them civilized, right? And that
Quote unquote.
happened, you know, that happened is, you know, something super real. And when you think about it, just like the amount of intention in that, that will create a generation of indigenous peoples that were not only removed from, forcibly removed from who they were, but also, in a way, it was worse than if you just killed them off. Because what happens is they will have children, and then those children would be born into a world that said, you don't really matter, like, or you kind of matter, but only if you stay in your reservation, and you know, you just live up to our standards, and you live up
Yeah.
to
Or almost like
the,
you must do this if you want to be a part of this society, which is the
totally,
arrogance.
which you know, when you ask me about like, you know, how can we like shift it, how can we move it forward, it really comes down to, here, give me 1 second. My son, give me 1 second.
Okay.
Um, yeah, when you think, my son is just watching something now. When you think about, when you think about that intentionality of erasure, then these children that now have no sense of their ceremonies, no sense of their song, no sense of their identity, then birth other children, which is my generation, where um, where I think that throughout this time, these tools, that are photography, storytelling in general, but especially photography and videography, now with social media as well, these are tools that in the beginning of these tools, they were intentionally used to capture, to shoot, to also take from people's. So you start seeing how we use those things for that, maybe not intentionally. Let's just say that a lot of these photographers, they try their best, but what happened is that it left a mark, just like the Indian boarding schools left a mark on people. It left a mark that, for example, now we have normalized using the word subject,
Mm,
or shooting,
hmm.
or capturing, and taking, and that's just something that is embedded within our psyche. We just shot on iPhone, like, it's just, we don't think about these things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that how we change it is that we start with the language. I think that when we start reprogramming our brain, and that's really what it is, it's just a program. That the fact that you only see, there's only 2% of the population in the United States that is indigenous Native American. So that's a tiny bit of it, right? So when you look at the newsrooms, when you look at who's making the documentaries and who's getting the grants and who's getting the opportunities, it's often, up until last year, when people all of a sudden realized that, like, oh my God, there's something more than just white people. I think they were like, wait, hold on, like, we have to give this these
Other
grants,
people
these
a
things
chance.
to the people that are actually in the photo, because up until now, we I think a lot of people don't even know that there's Native Americans in the country. So you look at that erasure and that intergenerational erasure and intergenerational trauma, and I think that's what a lot of photographers, I don't know if you've seen this database that we created, but Indigenous Photograph, now we have people all over the world that are telling those stories. So we have this generation, and really it's like I was saying earlier, it's a movement of how do we not only tell the story, not only get that seat at the table, or that equity, but also how do we are put in positions of leadership, or positions where we can say the future can look like this.
Hmm.
Do you all want to go in this way, or do you want to continue saying shooting, taking, capturing, and subjecting?
Yeah,
And I think that
yeah.
that's the language. I think that the more and more people in the industry are starting to become aware and kind of start waking up to, oh wow, yeah, there is racism, oh yeah, there is inequality, then they're gonna have to like upgrade, like it's
Yeah.
like a constant, we all have to constantly update our system. And I think that that's what's happening right now. So how we change it is we start with the language.
Well, I hope. Unfortunately, we probably have run over here. I could talk to you about this for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do this again, Josue. Honestly, I mean, because I agree with you. Again, as being born in the U.S. And being white, uh, we are not taught this history. I've gone and sought it out. And
Yeah.
if you seek out this history, and including enslavement of Africans, suddenly things start to make sense. Now, Trump's hero was Andrew Jackson, who allied the Cherokee against the Creeks and wiped out the Creeks, stole their land, sold it, and then marched the Cherokee and all the rest of the Native American nations across the Mississippi River, sold their land, opened it up for more slavery, bigger plantations. Suddenly, American history begins to make sense, and it must be taught. And I really appreciate the work you're doing, because you're contributing to that in the present tense.
Yeah,
But it has,
and imagine. I mean, Andrew Jackson is like what he did, and what that was done. It was basically like
war criminal.
that's what this pipeline was. I mean, Andrew Jackson's philosophy and just worldview and an idea that manifest destiny was real. It's like, oh no, God gave me this right to do this one thing. So these people that are putting these pipelines, the Dakota Access Pipeline, they have the same idea. They have, the economy, progress. I am the one that's supposed to do this, or we're supposed to be doing this for our country. And I think that what we're forgetting about there is that, just like Andrew Jackson put natives versus natives, that's exactly what happened at Standing Rock. People were infiltrated, and people were,
Wow.
the FBI was sending in native people to go, instigate their own communities. This stuff's real. It's not like a movie. Like, this happened. There's articles on, on
Yeah.
mainstream
So it's
articles that are
it's
like
not a thing
talking
of the
about
past.
this.
It's a thing of the present. It's
It's
still
very
happening.
much. And how do we get to that, like 10 years from now, to be like, wait, hold on. Let's not let that happen again. Let's create, at least in my eyes, for the photojournalism industry, or the photojournalism world, really, in the storytelling world, is like, let's rush to really understand these basic things, like language, like, who's telling the story, who's not, like, just those are basic things. But then also, how do we teach people in, like, school, like journalism school, that, hey, that's actually not that, like, you don't really have, like, the right to just jump into someone's life, and like, and
I'd go further. Go to elementary school.
Elementary school.
Start early.
It's a fundamental thing that I think extraction, it's hand in hand with Americanism. It's like, just
manifest
like, hey,
destiny.
be the best, and it's like, actually, it's like that kid that wants to, like, show off that they accomplish so many things, but they, like, push so many people aside to do that, or they step on a lot of people. So I think that's the foundation of a lot of this paradigm shift, I think, that is happening. And like things like this, like having conversations, but then also taking action, in a sense. So for me, like, this year, I want to see, is there any way that we can change and stop using these super colonial, like, words in photography? Like, I don't want a slave, remember, like you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like, you have a slave, and it's like, you have, your what is it called, like, your flash, what was it, like, a slave and something else, or master. There you go. See, like,
I hadn't thought about that, because I don't use flash that much, but that's absolutely right.
But even if we don't intend to be, like, racist or, like, unaware, like, the fact that we just don't have another option is the problem. I think is that, why can't we use the word making, or the person in the image, I think the future is collaboration. I think this whole idea of photojournalism and photography we have, I think in, like, 10 years, we've already seen it, but in 10 years, we're going to see how collaboration in creating things together with people is actually how we become active in doing this work.
I'd like to welcome Fausto Podavini, finalist for the 2019 FotoEvidence Book Award and World Press Photo, for Omo Change, which can now be found in book form. Omo Change deals with the Omo Valley in Ethiopia, where an Italian and Chinese consortium built a massive dam which affected the climate and the lives of the indigenous people who live along the river, sending out ripples of change in their daily lives. Fausto is based in Rome, still lives there. Omo Change was awarded the second prize for long-term projects in 2018 at World Press Photo, and he also won a first prize for daily life category at World Press Photo in 2013, about a story about an aging couple in Rome, Mirella and Luigi, as Mirella cared for Luigi as his battle with Alzheimer's complicated her lives, and it was a challenge to care for him. So I'd like to welcome Fausto, and he will share his important environmental project with us right now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, James, for your time, and FotoEvidence for this occasion for presentation my work. The Omo Change tell and document the big investment from European and China country in the Omo Valley, one of the most important place for its peculiar biodiversity, despite the desert and the semi-desert ambient. This area has been declared as a UNESCO human heritage around 40 years ago. A big dam construction for investment of brand new cotton farm are changing dramatically both the naturalistic ambient, but not only. But the change is for the local people daily life. For me, is a very important document. This fact, not only the environmental change, but how a concrete wall could change the lives of people who have always lived along the river. This is the dam, no? the focus of my story. What happened when the man construction this wall? What happened in environment situation and the social situation? This is the name of this dam is the Gibe tree. And at the moment, this is the highest dam in Central Africa. The dam started the construction around 8-9 years ago, and finish 2 years ago. During the construction, the life of the people who lives in around the river is changed, dramatically changed. The dam is construction of the Italian company and the China company for the electric part for the dam. This is the life the people when there are in the dam. This picture, I took this picture. It was one of the first photo I took on my first trip. Here the Caro Ethnics, and is very interesting because you can see the landscape where the people lives, and you can see the river. The left is a very big river, and the name of this river is Omo River. But it's incredible because after 5 years, I go back in this place, and I can took another picture in the same place, but the landscape is very different. Now I show this picture. When I return in this place 5 years ago, I can see the change in the landscape. If you look closely in the second photo in the right, there is no longer the river the river forest, rainforest, that has given way to cotton plantation. And the change is very dramatically, because you can see the level of water of the river is very down. The dam has finished 5 months ago.
Okay.
When I took this picture.
Okay. Is the dam upriver or downriver from this photo?
Down.
Okay.
Down. The dam is in the center of Ethiopia, and when where the river is born, and all the river, the Omo Valley is down where is the construction of the dam, and the river finish your way in Kenya, where make Turkana Lake. But the dam is around in the center of Ethiopia. The dam was used for the production of electricity, but in this area was not used for the south of Ethiopia, which remain without. And this is a very big contradiction, no? Because, okay, the dam for the electricity, but why not for the south of the Ethiopia, but only for the capital of the north? And the Omo Valley in the south of Ethiopia, and the people don't have electricity for the daily life.
Very interesting.
And here you can see the old payload of the electricity and the new line.
So, very important project, and this is a complex project. In fact, I saw a similar thing in Borneo, in Malaysia, where the local people did not have electricity, and the wires went right over their houses on the way to Singapore across the South China Sea. It's just crazy. So this is, such an important project. I'd like to ask you more questions about the project, but I think mostly we have time for your concept. When you are taking on a project, it seems to me that you're trying to make people aware of an issue and to create positive change, or at least to defend the people. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you feel about your project and what you want to accomplish for the people of Omo?
Unfortunately, in the Omo Valley area, there are not NGO for the right of the people. The local were not interested in the dam construction project. The local people.
Mm-hmm.
One day, these people woke up and found the river with little water.
Oh.
And
so they did not know about the dam.
Yeah, because only the decision by the government is only in in Amharic language and English language, but no translation for the local language for the people, because the people in the Omo Valley no speak Amharic or English, but only your personal language.
And no one came to consult with them to give them information.
Yeah, nothing. And the very big problem is there aren't NGO for the right human right, no, in this area. And then with my work, my work aims to give a voice to a people who are voiceless without right.
I'd like to thank you for joining us today on how photography can be used as a form of activism. I'd like to thank FotoEvidence for bringing us all together, the New York Art Book Fair, and thanks to our speakers, Solmaz Dardiani, Josue Rivas, and Fausto Podavini. I'm James Whitlow Delano, and thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.